biblically. But see, this is biblical. You don't get the biblical argument. Like I said, you get the language, but you don't get the debate. Because this stuff is based upon identity politics, critical theory, all that kind of stuff. It's not based. This is not flowing from the text of Scripture. This is coming from out here, and then you form the text of Scripture, and you make sure to make reference to it. But it's not flowing from the text of Scripture. I've got this. And, oh goodness, I'm not sure how long this is all going to go today. And we started late. Phil Vischer, of course, of VeggieTales fame, is as woke as you can get. I mean, I guess the reason that people keep making reference to him and things like that, it was because of VeggieTales. But look, the guy's got two left wings. He's as woke as they come, and it's like he's not saying anything that all the other woke people aren't saying. So I'm not sure why he gets quite as much attention as he does. But he had Jamar Tisby on, and of course we've watched the trajectory of Jamar Tisby over a number of years now, moving farther and farther and farther to the left, and now he's into the anti-racism stuff. And so what you need to understand is this is another abusive language. He's literally going to say that you are either promoting racism or you're fighting racism. There is no middle ground. And of course, the definition of racism is the new definition, not the biblical definition of racism. Not treating someone unjustly on the basis of hatred and thinking that you're better because of your skin color. No. And as you listen to this conversation, what I want to point out to you is how America-centric it is. It is meaningless in Canada. It's meaningless in Mexico. It's meaningless in Saudi Arabia. It's meaningless in Zimbabwe. It's meaningless in Russia. It's super meaningless in China. It's all us and our history, and how our history is, there is no past. What happened in the past is as much a reality today. There can be no progress. There can be nothing. Today is as bad as 1859. It's just as bad. But it's only about certain groups. So I've pointed out, I don't know if you saw the horrific video. And it was just, and I found out later on, it was just security cam video. I was thinking someone was recording this and they were probably, that meant it was a setup. It wasn't. It was security cam video of a black man, a black 19-year-old man attacking and knocking to the ground an 84-year-old man from Thailand and killing him. He died. And there is a tremendous amount, evidently, in that, and this is in San Francisco, there's a tremendous amount of anti-Asian black racism. There's a tremendous amount of black racism. I mean, there's just a huge amount of black racism. And that's exactly what you would expect from a biblical perspective. Why? Because you're telling a community for years on end that you can't commit a certain sin. That's the best way to produce a sin I've ever thought of. Tell a whole group of people, you can't be this sin. That's going to make sure that you're probably going to get a lot of that sin amongst those people. It's absurd. It's evil. But it is the standard orthodoxy today, and it's part and parcel of the woke message. So you will get now what's interesting is Phil Vischer will, in a snarky way, push back with objections, which shows they know exactly what the issues are. They won't deal with the actual presentation of meaningful arguments about it, but they know what the issues are. So I want you to hear a little bit of use of religious language at the beginning, and then filling that religious language with completely political, social justice, neo-Marxism after that. Rather than, well, here we have this biblical example here, or actually, we need to be careful not to just use American examples here. But, social justice in the Philippines looks different than social justice in China, which looks different, that kind of stuff. You don't get that. It's all, we're going to do the equality and equity thing solely on the basis of the black experience in the United States, not the Chinese experience in the United States, not the Irish experience, not the Italian experience. No other group, that doesn't matter. They don't fit the narrative. Because all sorts of other groups have been disadvantaged over time. Well, they were never enslaved. I would say that the Chinese were. I would say that the working conditions of Chinese workers in the western part of the United States at a later time, closer to our time, were worse than many situations under slavery decades down the way. So if you applied this thinking, there should be reparations for Chinese Americans. The problem is Asians are actually being discriminated against because of this narrative in jobs and education, because they do so well, because they don't allow what happened back then to determine where they are now. So here's Jamar Tisby with Phil Vischer. Let's listen to what they had to say.
We're fighting for racial justice. That's kind of a controversial term because different people define it differently. How do you define it, just so we know when we're going into the book?
Yeah, so it means giving people what they are due. And in the case of racial justice, number one, it's shaped biblically by the doctrine of the image of God and what God says we are due as human beings. It speaks to the grand and simple.
Can I just point out that even in Jesus' own parables, he said that an employer has the right to bring workers in at different times and yet pay them all the same. Was that equality and equity? His parables talk about kings and the rights of kings to engage in war, to execute people, to punish servants who do not perform in the way they knew they should in front of a king. These are all things that Jesus said. And obviously, we have to take those parables and then make application globally, not just in the United States. If we make application in the United States based upon a particular enforced reading of our own history and then export that outside the United States, the result has been disastrous and is damaging to the cause of the gospel. Just thought I'd mention that in light of what was, when it said what we're due. Due on what basis? Well, as human beings. Okay. Does that mean that you are owed the same position as someone else? What's going to happen here is he's going to argue that because of what happened 160 years ago, or even 60 years ago, that black Americans should be given advantages over white Americans today to allow them to catch up in the race. That's going to be the affirmative action stuff and reparations and all the rest of that stuff. And we see once you cross the border into Canada, that's no longer relevant. Once you go across the border in Mexico, that's no longer relevant. Totally different situations. And so this is just in America, but they don't leave it just in America. That's the problem with that. So that's the difference between equality and equity as it's going to be defined here. Okay, so.
But oh so difficult to live out principle, loving one's neighbor as oneself. And it speaks to the idea of
loving your neighbor as yourself has absolutely positively nothing to do with the color of his skin. And in the church, it has nothing to do with who his ancestors were. Has nothing to do with who his ancestors were whatsoever. If I was talking with a couple that's just joining our church Sunday night, a black brother and but not a black wife. not a white wife. Brown. Let's go that direction, okay? If either one of them experienced prejudice in employment, housing, anything like that, I would want us to do everything we could to have that inequality addressed in terms of justice. Justice needs to be done. Doesn't matter what color their skin is. And if they are if they encounter racists, then those racists need to be rebuked. But the same thing is true whether we're talking about Asians. How about whether we're talking about Russians? Oh, yeah, Russians. Should Russians be discriminated against because they're Russian? Well, they are white. You see, any type of injustice needs to be addressed in a just fashion. And when you demand a particular reading of history and ignore the sufferings the Chinese had, ignore the sufferings the Irish had, my own ancestors. I've shown you pictures on this program. My progenitors came here in abject poverty. Should I demand that I receive the fruits of the labors of other people whose ancestors came with riches because my ancestors were dirt poor? That's what we're getting. That's what you're getting here. That's what you're going to hear.
Particularly in its racial dimensions, that Black people and people of color have not been given our due in terms of equity, in terms of distribution of resources, in terms of opportunity. And it speaks to the idea that we...
Let me ask a question. Are there any Black Americans who were given their quote-unquote due? Have there ever been any rich Black Americans? Are there any rich Black Americans today? Are there rich Black Americans who inherited their wealth? Are there rich Black Americans who, for example, have received riches from less than beneficial sources? Do we just overlook that? What about white Americans who have been put in difficult positions for holding to positions of morality when they could have gone another direction and been benefited? You see, that's the insanity of using race, ethnicity as the standard and saying all Blacks are in one group, all whites are another group, all Asians are another group, all Hispanics are in another group. That's just absurdity. It's absurdity on its face. And yet that's what we're facing. That's what we're facing.
To be intentional and be actively working to ensure equity and justice. We can't simply, I say this in the book, you are either actively working against racism or you are supporting racism, whether actively or passively.
Now, how would a Christian oppose racism? By living justly in light of God's law, not by being a neo-Marxist. Not by demanding that someone give their money, which God says is for their children and their grandchildren, to you. Not through income redistribution. Not through rejecting the fact that God blesses some and not others. None of that. Biblically. But see, this is biblical. You don't get the biblical argument. Like I said, you get the language, but you don't get the debate. Because this stuff is based upon identity politics, critical theory, all that kind of stuff. It's not based. This is not flowing from the text of Scripture. This is coming from out here, and then you form the text of Scripture, and you make sure to make reference to it, but it's not flowing from the text of Scripture at all.
There's no in between. You're supporting
that feels offensive. That feels offensive to me.
Yeah, well.
So remember, anti-racism, Kindy and all the stuff that's very, very, very popular, these guys are bringing this into the church. And the thing is, anti-racism is actually racism because the language is under assault. And so if you, for example, say, well, I don't look at a person's skin color to judge them. I actually, sort of fulfilled the dream of Martin Luther. Oh, no. You can't do that. Remember when I was just viciously attacked for daring to say that back in, I don't know how long ago it was, but especially since 2018, viciously attacked for that. So anti-racism is actually the promotion of racism. And so you're put into a sort of Kafka-esque trap here. Is you're either a racist or an anti-racist, but to be an anti-racist is actually biblically to be a racist. So you got no place to go. So it's sort of like what I said this morning when I retweeted that video of that guy who killed the 84-year-old just out of hatred, just out of evil. I said, so I'm a racist for breathing, but this guy isn't a racist when he commits first-degree murder just because of his skin color? A society that will actually accept that is a society that's laying on its deathbed, gasping its last gasps.
Sorry.
I'm not being racist, Jamar, just by not being anti-racist.
Okay, so that's sort of a negation, a way of thinking about it in negative terms. But what are you positively doing to support racial justice is the question.
I have a black friend.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, his name is Jamar. You're what I'm doing. Okay.
Right,
so
right.
I'm done. Right. Am I good? Are we good?
Well, number one, why is it just one? Would they say the same thing about you? Are you assuming a closeness in the relationship that they wouldn't have? And then number two, beyond the perhaps benefit of your one black friend, what are you doing for the masses of people who Howard Thurman says have their backs against the wall, the disinherited, the dispossessed, because we are affected by racism, not just individually or singly, but as a group. So how are we looking at this in a more broad-based way?
Okay. So it's not enough to have a black friend. I need to back up and look at the big picture. Darn it, that's homework, Jamar. Okay, but if someone could write a book that would help me, that would be absolutely fantastic. Why do you use the word equity instead of equality? We want everyone to be equal, right?
Right. Well, it's a common misunderstanding. So equality, people think, basically means treating everyone the same way. The problem is, after hundreds and hundreds of years of inequality and oppression, it's not enough to treat people the same way. It's as if you're running a race and someone has 100-yard head start. The other person has been chained and can't move. You finally unlock the chain and say, catch up. That's equality. We can both run. Equity is saying, no, we need to do things to make sure I catch up to where you are because you have that head start illegally and unjustly. And in order to move toward that direction of equality, we can't actually treat everyone the same because we were not historically treated the same way. And so we have to do.
So you're hearing this? You see what the end result of all this is. The argument today that you have to privilege people because of what happened generations before they came along, rather than doing what Thomas Sowell has pointed out is the only logical thing, and that is to recognize, in reality, the black family was doing pretty good. And what happened? Well, you've got this, and they're going to talk about here. They even know this. They know these things. They know that the breakup of the black family, and it doesn't matter what group you put this into. The presence of the father and the mother in the stable family unit determines how far you're going to go in life, not your color. That's true outside the United States, which means all your going back to history is a lie. It will not accomplish anything. If you did everything that Jamar Tisby and the social justicians are saying, it won't stop Chicago. It won't. The violence won't end. So you are wasting our time. And you're wasting billions of dollars and dividing the nation up with answers that don't accomplish anything. The reality of where the origin of these things is found in the breakup of the family. Look at what caused that. Look to the people who continue to promote that to this day in the black community. There's your problem. Because you see, it's the same thing north of the border. It's the same thing over in the UK. It's the same thing wherever you want to go. It's called human nature because we're made in the image of God. You already said that, but then you're denying it by the way you argue.
Particular things, proactive things, affirmative things to make sure that everyone has an equality of opportunity.
But what do you say to someone who responds to that and says, well, you just want all the outcomes to be identical, and the outcomes are never all identical in life? Jamar?
Yeah, I would say.
But then notice they are assuming the existence of white privilege. Again, it's all the American type stuff. Now they're talking about what Sol himself has said repeatedly on this issue. And that is you will never have equality of outcome. And yet, what are the arguments all about? The arguments are based on equality of outcome. We have to do everything we can to create equality of outcome. And if any one group outperforms another, Asian Americans outperform white Americans educationally and in business. So what they're saying is, well, you should do something to disprivilege Asian American privilege. Might it be that there is within the Asian American community an emphasis upon family and tradition and respect that has something to do with this? That you have a more stable family unit there? Yeah, it has everything to do with it. I can't be enough. No. And it can't be enough only in a system where you're trying to fundamentally undo the way America once existed. That's why all this is happening. That's where it goes.
Where did you get that? When did I say that? I would.
You want us both to be running side by side through the race and to not have one person finish ahead or behind, even if they're faster or slower. That's what you want. Is that what you want?
I want an acknowledgement that people have been deliberately disadvantaged.
Okay, no, wait. What's that going to accomplish? Will you acknowledge that my ancestors were deliberately disadvantaged? Yes or no? You're a historian, sir. You know they were. There's a very good chance that Jamar Tisby's immediate preceding family members were in far better economic conditions than mine were. So what's that supposed to mean? What is this acknowledgement supposed to do? What is the consistent stance of penance supposed to accomplish? And if we could just draw this into the Christian faith for a moment, once again, Scythian test failure. Ding, 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 ding. We need to come up with a graphic that you can play on the computer and it'll just flash over me. Scythian test failure. This attitude would have destroyed the apostolic church. If the apostles had allowed the Phil Vischers of the world and the Jamar Tisbys of the world to drag all this stuff into the church, just think of all of the ethnic divisions that are represented in the church at Colossae, in the church at Ephesus, in the church at Rome, and if they had been having to do all this constant penance to one another, they never would have gone to the table together. It's all dealt with at the cross. It's done. But, oh, no. We've got to keep pushing.
Have to do something about that. I want an explanation for the racial wealth gap, why it's not only large, but still growing. Is your response to that Black people are just lazy, haven't been able to do anything with the opportunities they've been given, just want a government
handout? It was welfare,
handout?
Jamar. It was the welfare that broke everything. Do you know how many people I've had tell me that?
Now, see, they know where the real issue is. They know it's in the family. They know that because they have a Christian background. But they suppress it under this socialist, Marxist idea that they then promote and smile about. I just... Obviously, even when I first started listening to Jamar Tisby years ago, you see the trajectory, you see where it's going, but you just hope. You know, it's sort of like looking at the world right now. I look at what's going on and I just hope that it's not going to continue going there. Go ahead and take that down, because I'm only halfway through my list. I'm a terrible, terrible man. Just going way too slowly. Sorry.